I'll say this again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the plenary session of the Entrepreneurship Division. As we say in Alabama, thank you all for coming. The plenary session is organized by the program chair in the Entrepreneurship Division, which is me this year, with the support of the PDW chair, Christina here, and the rest of the entrepreneurship leadership, some of which are in the audience. Now, just to make sure we all understand why this is a joint effort, if things go well, we all get to take part of the credit, and if things don't go well, we just put the blame on the other people of the organization, on the panel. Well, before we have for you 4 wonderful panelists today. We'll have a detailed introduction in a few minutes, but I think all of you probably know them. Davidsson from Sweden, Connie Helfat from the US, Herman Aguinis from the US, and Jeff McMullen from the US, and we'll have more detailed introductions in a few minutes. Before we start, let me emphasize the practical importance, practical interest, practical importance in this topic, as all major media in the US and overseas are paying attention to the crisis of research credibility in our scientific enterprise. Here are some examples from major newspapers in the US. The New Yorker, they studied dishonesty, was their work a lie? Wall Street Journal, flood of fake science forces multiple journal closures. New York Times, Staples audacious academic fraud. Washington Post, Stanford president will resign after questions about research. Concerns about the research credibility of the scientific enterprise are expanding and growing and becoming more and more vocal. Having said that, I will now invite each of our panelists to introduce themselves and share some opening remarks focused on their position on this topic. We'll start with Dr. Davidsson.
Okay, thank you.
Mike?
Okay, thank you so much. I'm glad we organized this. I'm very passionate about meaningful cumulative knowledge. We're not in this game to produce papers to enhance our careers. We are part of an extremely important societal institution, research, which needs to sustain its credibility, right? And personally, I would not, like if I have a medical condition, I would not seek advice from an individual empirical study. I would want to see results repeated before I trust anything. But I see replication as one element in a package of that leads to meaningful cumulative research. We also need theory with shared, well-defined concepts, not a lot of different concepts for the same thing, and not the same concept for a lot of different things. We need shared, validated operationalizations. It's a bit pointless to do an exact replication of a study using measures that we don't trust in the first place. Right? We need reviews and meta-analyses that are not just replications, but approach a question in different ways, and if all this evidence tends in a certain direction, we can be more certain of it. But we also need attempted exact replications so that we know more of the contextual boundary conditions of results, so we know that influential studies actually got it right, and especially the increasing problems with academic dishonesty, we need to make sure that it was not that kind of underpinning of the original results.
Thank you, Bert. Dr. Helfat.
Okay. Does that work? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been reading what some of these other people have to say. So, but when Vishal asked me to do this, I said, well, you know, my views have kind of evolved. Are you sure you want me to do this? And he said yes. So I think Vishal said take 2 minutes or less. So let me give you the quick evolution. When I was first starting out, I'm a strategic management scholar, and I went to the new faculty consortium, and Carolyn Wu, who is one of the leaders of the field, got up and said, there's 5 kinds of papers you can write to get published. And one of them was to write a replication study. And I always remembered that. And I thought, as the years went on, I thought, I'm not seeing any replication studies, very few. I would say, parenthetically, the research policy, I think, all along has published replication studies. But, all right, that's an aside. So, it started to bother me more and more. So when I was actually not yet a co-editor of SMJ, I was talking to Rich Bettis. Turns out he was worried about this. So we decided to do a special issue of SMJ, and we roped in Miles Shaver. It was published in 2016. And our aim was not to do exact replications. The aim was not to find fault. The aim was to advance scholarship on particular areas where you need more than one study, right, to your point. So we said we wanted to do what we called quasi-replications. I believe Andreas and some of you have been calling these constructive replications, which are, seeing if an initial result, which has been, reasonably well cited, actually holds up in different time periods, different contexts, different technologies, different industries, etc., right? And we also made the point that one replication does not, in itself, invalidate another study or validate a particular point of view. You do need, cumulative knowledge. And so we did publish this. I'm very proud of it. The entire special issue of something like 11 papers are quasi or constructive replications. And I'm not convinced. I love Chris Crawford's study with his co-authors, but I don't think you need to do exact replications first in order to do a constructive replication. You can take the original paper and say, in a new setting with different data, we can try and do similar variables, similar methods, and then improve on them. So why have my views evolved? Right? My views have evolved because sometimes what I'm seeing in other fields, is a real emphasis on exact replications, and it's never clear to me why the particular authors get targeted for exact replications out of the whole universe of things you could replicate, right? And that gives me a bit of pause, right? Because I think there's a fine line when you're conducting an exact replication because you think a result looks odd, right? Like it doesn't seem to pass the smell test. And conducting exact replication because you don't like a result or it conflicts with your belief system, right? Which I really think is not a way to advance science, right? And actually, I've always thought the best way to argue with a result you don't like is to go do your own research, to test what you think is a better way of doing it. That's different than a replication. But when it comes to replications, I actually am a big proponent of the quasi or constructive replications because I think that really helps us build the cumulative knowledge.
Thank you, Connie. Dr. Aguinis?
Good afternoon. I'm Herman Aguinis from George Washington University, and there are many issues that we need to think about to put replication or replicability in context, which is, Per mentioned the issue of credibility, Connie mentioned the issue of trustworthiness or repeated studies. So this is an issue that all of us are dealing with at this point. It's an issue very critical for the long-term sustainability of our business schools and our industry, because if our research is not credible, rigorous, and useful and impactful, then no one is going to give us money to do it. So because it is our problem, I'd like to work through it together. So I'd like to do a little thought experiment, okay? So I want you to think about the latest article you just read. Maybe this morning, maybe last night, published article. Maybe on the flight. Do we have anyone from Singapore or Australia or Hong Kong? I had a couple of, like, wow, it's what a flight. But in any case, so those people read like 4 or 5 papers and then watched 3 movies and they took a nap. So think about it, one paper, okay? Not any abstract idea. Think about this one article you just read. Okay, it's an article in a domain that you're familiar with, you know. Okay, you got it? One paper? Yes? Are you thinking about that one paper? First row, in what journal did that paper get published?
AMJ.
AMJ. So we have a paper from AMJ.
International Market Management, actually.
International Market Management. Okay? You please? What? AMJ. Okay? Sorry to pick on the first row, but you're closest to me.
This here, Journal of Financial and Quantitative Analysis.
Great. Journal of Financial Quantitative Analysis. Completely different area. So you may be thinking about an article in JBV. Think about an empirical article, not a theoretical article. Okay. I'm going to ask you some specific questions about this article that you read. So try to remember the article, okay? First question. Are you fully convinced that the authors reported openly and transparently all the data collection and data cleaning procedures? For example, how they managed outliers, if they included, I already have enough, if they included or excluded outliers, if you see the final model with a set of control variables, if that is the initial and final set of controls, or there were several sets of controls that the authors included and excluded until eventually that final set was published, but that information may not be included in the paper. So tell me if you're fully convinced that everything in terms of missing data imputation techniques, for example, any kind of data transformations, if they transform data to normalize data, if any of those data cleaning procedures were openly and transparently described in the paper. Raise your hand if you believe that's true. 1, 2. The question is if you believe the authors openly and transparently reported all of these data cleaning and preparation procedures. 1, 2, 3 out of, I don't know, 80? 5. Okay, thank you, Per. I'm going to ask you another couple of questions. Please don't get too depressed. There will be good news at the end of the road. Number 2, raise your hand if you're fully convinced that the authors reported all the analyses. For example, the final model you see, that is the initial model. If they put variables in and out, that all the analyses, if they tried different econometric techniques or models, non-parametric, parametric, that all of those analyses that were done before reporting were openly and transparently reported in the paper. Raise your hand if you believe that's true. So we have to read these papers. These 2 papers are amazing. It's the same people saying yes. So we have like 3 hands. Number 3, you're convinced that the authors fully and transparently reported all the results, including the results for hypotheses that were not supported. Quick side note, I'm not blaming authors. Sometimes the reviewers ask you to take out information on hypothesis 3 because the paper is very long and that was not supported, so take it out. So raise your hand if you believe all the results were openly and transparently reported in that published paper. Financial quantitative now.
We never know.
We never know, so we don't know. And the final question is, do you think if you try to do the same study, assuming that you even get together with the authors of the original study, so they tell you exactly what they did, you will get the same p-values, the same effect sizes, the same subsets and conclusions. Do you think you would be able to do that? Raise your hand. We need to give us a full source. So I'm going to close this because I want to hear from the other panelists, but given this thought experiment where we have 3, 4, 5 hands out of 80, is our research sufficiently credible? Is our research sufficiently impactful in terms of being useful? Are journal reviewers sufficiently equipped with the methodological skills and knowledge to evaluate the papers they receive, the papers they evaluate? How about the journal editors and the associate editors who, in many cases, have been trained 20 or 30 years ago, when many of the methods that are used today were not even known? And how are we training the doctoral students who are the future scholars so their research will be sufficiently rigorous, credible, and impactful? So I want you to think about these questions because I think many of those are part of the conversation that we need to seriously engage in. please don't get too depressed. It will be good news later.
First of all, thank you so much for having me, Vishal. My name is Jeff McMullen from Indiana University. I'm the editor-in-chief of Journal of Business Venturing. This is interesting. When Vishal first brought this up, I kind of said, no, I don't want to do this. I think it's boring. I don't think anyone will show up. I was wrong. So well done, Vishal. Why did I say that though? It wasn't flippant. I mean, we were talking about it, and I just thought, when I deal with replication studies, one, we're always open to them. So there's no policy for or against them. In fact, I would kind of resist such policies because I want to approach this subjectively in the sense that you could go to each one and evaluate the case. Does it make sense? Is there potential value here or not? But when I look at this, my biggest reservation, my biggest fear, typically when I get them, is not that they are written in the name of truth. As much as I would love to see a replication written the way that Herman just described, what I often see is exactly what Connie described, which is a hit job. And so what it is you get it comes in, it makes no sense why that paper, often from long ago, not relevant or not current, is an issue. It's almost always some top name that it feels vendetta driven. I mean, you get a sense if you look at article after article. I know it's hard to believe this, but if anybody who's edited knows this is true. Over time, you get a sense what's true and what's about power and politics and influence. You get a sense of it over time because you read enough of these reviews, you read enough papers, you get a sense of what's the motivation behind this. It's not perfectly accurate, but when you get that little feeling of something's off here, I think it's our due diligence and our obligation as editors to look more into this and ask this question of what's the reasoning behind this. So that's the first fear. That wouldn't stop me from sending the paper out or pursuing or looking into this issue more closely or having a replication study published. That's not the point, but how my first orientation would be, why now? Why this paper? What do we learn as a result of it? So the biggest challenge we usually see is what is the game? If this is wrong, if they find that this paper needs to be overturned, if it's about method, that there's a methodological error, that's a whole different discussion than what we're having right here. Basically, there's an implication here that something was done wrong on purpose. Some of the stuff that came up just now has an intentionality to it. That's a different situation than do the results hold under slightly different conditions? Do the results hold now, 20 years later after a study? That would be a study done in the name of truth, right? Like, does science from 20 years ago still hold today under conditions now, or in this alternative context? That doesn't feel like replication to me. That would be, in my opinion, a new study. You're building on previous research. You're contributing to the knowledge base. You have a contribution to make. Often when I get a paper positioned as a replication study, it's a direct replication most of the time, and it's some kind of implication that somebody did something wrong, and this is a moment to reveal. So is this about policing? Which, if it is this the best alternative for policing? Is this the best mechanism to capture things after the fact? Would like policing to be more on the prevention side than on after the damage has been done. Some of science is based and built with a conservative bias for a reason. The reason the bar is set so high to say this is knowledge is so that the next study has to test and refute that, and you don't want to just put out in the first study in a particular area something that we don't believe is rigorously conducted. If we do that, we create the situation for this desperate need for replication. So I wrestle with, when I take my position, is that I'm open to it. I think it can be done well. I think you can have contributions. If you have a direct replication, you have to make a very compelling case for why is this necessary, why is this needed. If that's made, that's on the authors to do that. They're going to have to do that because the reviewers are going to demand it as well. And you're going to get feedback, a contribution hasn't been made, you're going to run into all this anyway. So that's kind of the orientation, but that's the same orientation we use for any study. So I don't quite see what the difference would be for a replication study versus a new study, because that would be how I would approach almost any paper. I'd be like, what's the motivation here? How is it written? Is it conducted correctly? Is it transparently communicated? What the procedures were? So I have trouble figuring out what's categorically different about a replication study unless it's a direct replication, and then we're talking about a very specific case. I think that's a reasonable debate to have. Should we try to publish those? But then we get into some serious philosophy of science issues, which I'm happy to talk about as well, but that's a different case in point. So I don't want to just say replication means that we're just seeing if science holds. That would be science. That's different than replication seems to be a specific case of that for me. So I know for now, I know we're going to keep talking, so thank you.
Thank you all for these opening remarks, which, as you might have noticed, reflect different views about replication. To make our conversation sort of structured and interactive, we'll ask our panel a set of questions, and we'll also open the floor to questions from the audience in just a couple of minutes, just a few minutes. But let me start with the first question. What does the word replication mean to you? Does it mean that the methods described in the paper should be replicable, or that the results presented in the paper are replicable? Or does it involve both? Or is it something else? Well, let's start with you.
Well, there's some terminological confusion about replicability and reproducibility and so forth. I sympathize with Jeff's concerns about hit jobs and so forth when it comes to re-examine a particular paper and with the apparent intent is to say that it doesn't replicate. But I don't. This is not my majority view of what replication is about, and also positive replications need to be positive. Replication need to appear as well, because well, the first thing I learned very early. I'm drifted from the question a little bit. We had a 7-country collaboration examining largely the same thing, publishing in a special issue. Each published their own results within their own theoretical framework and analysis method that alike. Gives you a very confusing image of the important relationship. We were also forced to have a harmonized analysis, maximize the similarity in the analysis, came up with 3 strong factors about the regional drivers of high startup rates. Very strong evidence, right? Because we forced that harmonization. We need both the freedom to do it the way we like and the collective. Another early experience, I had a study where I had 6 separate samples of publishable size, at least then publishable size, so about 150 to 200 cases in each. I ran the same regression in those. It was sort of 6 core explanatory variables. And when you have statistically significant effects of a standard effect of 0.10 to 0.20, they become statistically significant. They're all over the shop if you compare sample after sample. We grossly underestimate the random element of how those results come out. And for that reason, we need to replicate as well. There may be no ill intent or cherry picking on the part of a regional study, but we need to have very strong evidence, much more stronger than a single study can provide.
And Connie, as you answer this question, can you also touch upon the distinction you made between replication and quasi-replication?
Yeah, so actually, so in that special issue, we wrote an introduction and we actually put a little framework in there of types of replication. So Jeff called them direct, I call them exact. There's also a paper by Eric Zhang in, I think, ANJ in the 90s, where he had slightly different terminology, including reproducibility. But, all right, so I actually think these quasi or constructive replications are replications because they are efforts to use similar data using similar methods to a particular paper. So, as Per was saying, you can actually get close to comparing apples and apples, trying to ferret out a particular relationship between particular constructs or sets of variables. So you know, but they're not exact replications because you're not using the exact same data with the exact same methods, etc. So I actually think those are valuable because they help us build knowledge. I've had one of my studies replicated. I had no idea about it until it showed up in the journal. I was so flattered.
I'm relieved.
Yeah, well, then I read it. It was quite interesting. They used data from the same country, from the same survey. There was a national survey in Finland, but in a later time period, and using basically the same types of variables because they came out of the same survey, all right? But in a later period, and they found the core result held, but one of our sort of results about the slope, they found something different. Well, we know perfectly well that we had a particular time period, and the curvature might change. I thought, well, that's interesting. We should learn more about this, right? So, I think that's valuable. So what does replication mean to me? I mean, I am pushing quasi-constructive replications, but you are talking similar data, starting with similar methods, right? And maybe either different context or different time period. So you can tell if a result changes, what's different. And then you could say, okay, I'm going to change the variables a little bit. I think beta's a better way to measure them. You can see, if you do that, what happens. Or you can change the method. And methods have improved in the past 20 years, right? What if we do that? If you do it step by step, you can see what's changed. So it's being specific about the context, the data, the methods, and why do things change.
Thank you. I'm going to amplify and also talk about the same issues. The nature of the game in our industry is making a contribution. Unless we make a contribution, the paper is not published. And typically a contribution to theory. That means we now understand, predict, and explain a phenomenon better. Theory sounds very fancy and complicated, but the bottom line is, whatever you study, after your study is done, can you understand, explain, and predict that phenomenon better? Related to that point of contribution, there are, in a paper we wrote in the new Journal of Management Scientific Reports, which is an offshoot of the Journal of Management Scientific Reports. We described 3 kinds of replication studies. One is called reproducibility studies, which is essentially use the same data as the original authors, run the same analysis, and see if you can get the same results. And that's what Crawford et al. Wanted to do. And they found that in only 1/3 of the studies they could find the same thing. But the reason is that the authors had not reported enough information for them to run the same analysis. For example, if you have a model with control variables, but in your correlation matrix, the controls are not in the matrix, you cannot run the same analysis. So the fact that you cannot reproduce doesn't mean that there was something wrong. So those are the kinds of studies that go for right or wrong, kind of a hit job. There's a lot of politics in that. Reproducibility, same data as the original study. Number 2, literal and constructive replication studies. 2 kinds of replication studies. Literal means that it's new data, but the same measures, and hopefully you draw from the same population. Literal. Constructive is different design, different measures, possibly different samples from different populations. So reproducibility, same data. Literal and constructive replication, different data, but either literal is same design and measures, and constructive, different designs and measures. And the third, and Per gave a couple of examples, is a generalizability study. You do the same study across different settings, different populations, different industries. As you think about the design of each of these studies, you're thinking about what contribution am I going to make when the study is done. And the key issue is when you find differences or similarities, what is the contribution to theory? So why? Why is it that across 7 cultural contexts, the effects are similar? Why culture didn't have an impact? Or industry? Or why, if I measure the DV as, let's say we have firm performance as a DV, if I use an accounting measure versus a market measure of performance, why that has an impact on the results, either getting the same results or different results. So I will talk more in a little bit about a paper that Andreas Schwab, are you here? Okay, Andreas Schwab is a lead author on another paper in the Journal of Management Scientific Reports titled How Replication Studies Can Improve Doctoral Student Education. Because we want our doctoral students to publish and get jobs. Do you have doctoral students here? Raise your hand. Do you want to publish and get jobs? All right. So you need to think if you want to do a replication study. And I'll give you some examples of journals that have published replication studies. How can you design the study, execute the study, like Jeff said, so that the replication study makes a contribution to theory and is publishable? So I'll talk some more about that. But for now, I just want you to think about different kinds of studies, different kinds of methods that lead to different goals and different kinds of contributions.
You know, it's interesting. I don't really think that if you're refuting or you're challenging, it's as difficult to replicate or get a replication published as if you are confirming, right? So if you refuted this, or you can refine, or you can challenge existing research, nobody's going to say, do you have a contribution? So that part, there's definitely a bias here for that kind of replication already. That would be a replication that's not actually replicating. It's showing that the research wasn't reliable or isn't reliable anymore, or there's some condition or effect that we have to deal with. Versus if you confirm, you run I guess what I'm bringing up is if people did those replication studies and they just absolutely confirmed, and then none of that was published, well, we have a serious issue there, right? So that's really the debate and discussion as a journal editor. Why? Because nobody's going to cite that. That's the biggest challenge that you run with. So please come back to that. I throw this out there on purpose because this is a thought process that runs through your head when you are editing. You know, is anybody going to use this? Is anybody going to cite this? Is anybody going to build on this? I think they could if you do confirmation studies and then build out what that teaches us and the robustness of knowledge in a space. But the onus is on you as the author to say this is how things change. You still have to show how the field has changed as a result of your research. It can't be, I did my research, it shows the field was right. And that's the presumption that we work with in science, is that the theory holds until you show there's conditions in which it doesn't hold. And so that's what makes it very difficult to publish the straight up confirmatory replication study. I did have few instances, but one instance in particular where somebody sent in, it was not a replication study, it was more of a challenge, because I think they were challenging a paper, and it was presented as a proposal for a replication. They'd gone through the analysis of a paper, an older paper, and I solicited, it cost me a bottle of scotch, but a really great research methods expert that I know. Not you, it was probably would have cost me two for this guy. Basically I said, hey, look, can you look at this? By the way, he did not ask for the scotch. I was just present afterwards. I was grateful for his efforts. But basically I was like, can you please go through this and tell me what you think? Because his methods expertise is, I think everybody would agree in the room, this was a fantastic person. And so I had him go through everything. I was like, I would really like your objective analysis. I felt like there might be some partiality towards the authors. I want to make sure I did not have any conflict there. And he comes back and he goes, yeah, okay, I know what this is about. And he goes through the whole thing, shows me the analysis, we walk through everything. And I'm like, what's your general assessment here? He goes, in this case, the methods have evolved, and these people are applying today's standards to a paper from 10 years ago. So in this case, it was written as, by the way, this wasn't me reading something into, this is accusatorily written, basically, or questioning the analysis and whether this was done with full transparency in mind, or was there some kind of manipulation, all that. So I had to take it very seriously, obviously. And the assessment in the end was, no, the results hold with new methods, and the new standards would reveal this, but if you go back to 10 years ago, this would have been the state of the art. So one problem that we have in this is the state of the art is improving. I don't want a replication standard using methods from 10 years ago, because arguably methods are getting better, or else we wouldn't have evolution of science in the field. And so that's one of the other challenges in this space that I think is very real on a pragmatic level. I'm not talking theoretically or hypothetically, I'm talking the actual practical publication of these types of research.
I'll move to the next question, but we'll come back to that, because one of the things that. Yeah, go
Can't I
ahead.
address the-
Go ahead, sorry.
Well, one of the myths of replication is that replication studies are not read and cited. And we don't know that because there are so few of them to begin with. There has never been published in JBV an article with replication or replicate in the title, ever. There are 5 in ETP, all from the last few years. There is 1 in SEJ from this year, so we're moving in the right direction. And there are 12 in JBVI, all from 2015. Of course, they couldn't be much earlier than that because the journal is not much older than that. I can give you examples from one of mine, Dahlqvist et al. 2000, Initial Condition as Predictors of New Venture Performance of Replication Extension of Cooper et al. Study. It has over 400 citations. It's one of the most cited papers in that journal. It was a short-lived and somewhat obscure journal because there was a merger, but also because replication studies are not so easily accepted in other journals. Frank et al. 2010 Entrepreneur Orientation and Business Performance of Replication Study, 484 citation. This is in Schmalenbach Business Review, which actually published a lot of journal research, but it is not well known in entrepreneurship. It is the 6th most cited ever in that journal. I have a lot of other examples here that are cited at the median or above for that journal at GS. So, and the reason for this, of course, is that replications try to replicate influential research, not studies that have gone undetected over time. So I don't accept this argument that they're not read and cited.
Clarify what you just reported were facts. I talked about what I was talking about was perception. They're not the same thing. There's a very big difference between beliefs and reality, and there's a divergence here between them. And my point was that when the authors submit this, it is on the authors, it is on their shoulders to make a case for why this paper is compelling and necessary, because reviewers will come back with what's the contribution here. It is an editorial bias, without a doubt, that these papers won't be cited as much. So this is education. I don't disagree with you, Barry. So what I'm responding to here is this isn't JBV specific, my God. This is field specific. This is basically social sciences specific, right? So it's a matter of every time we go to these things, the one reason I did not want to do this is because it becomes about the editors as if we are paid aficionados with big budgets and rolling out policies, but it's all volunteer labor. You people in the room are the reviewers. You're also the authors, but we're both. The system is us. So we always talk from the author's position as if there are reviewers and editors out there that are somehow different, like that's a separate community. And we're the authors, we're the victims, but we're not. I have to first communicate as an author, and then I have to turn around as an editor and I have to say, did they make a compelling case? Are the reviewers right, or are they just exhibiting a bias? That's a lot to keep asking of editors, to be policemen of the world. It's something we need to do. It's the job, I understand that. But it also starts, our system's very much based on self-policing and doing the right thing. And nobody wants to ever talk about that part. They always want to talk about the systems and how we can police better. That's the least efficient model. The most efficient model is how do you do science correctly, transparently, and open up front, so we're not in these positions, because these are always ugly. Let me tell you, people, it's not fun when you're about to ruin someone's career and you're delivering that news to them. Once I was and really briefly here, I was an auditor in accounting before this when I was young, and I had to bust somebody stealing. The guy was probably my age now, you know. Man, everybody thinks, oh, that'd be so cool. No, is it really cool to see a 53-year-old man crying in front of you? It's not. There's nothing great about that. We don't want to be in that position. How can we design the system to prevent these kinds of things? I 100% agree with you, and I think if publishing and policing is the way we can do it, great, but that's got to be the first step. It cannot be the final step. Replication cannot be, okay, now we've solved the problem. There's something more systemically problematic here that we've got to talk about, not just today, but I want to open that conversation, because that is a conversation no one wants to have, but that's the one that we need to have.
So just a quick follow-up. Thank you. I love this debate or different perspectives. But Per mentioned a bunch of papers that were published, and not only published, but also highly cited. And let me tell you the 4 reasons why. And you can replicate or tell me if I'm wrong or right. In all of the papers that you mentioned, and there are many others published, not that many, but first of all, you picked a very good precedent study. You said the original study was very influential, dealing with an important issue, and also I would have to add, fairly transparent and open, so you can actually see exactly what the authors did. So picking the right precedent study is absolutely key, number 1. Second issue that you mentioned is, and Jeff mentioned, is this is not a right versus wrong goal. You're not trying to do a hit job, as I think, Connie, you mentioned that term. So number 1, you pick a good precedent study. Number 2, this is not wrong versus right. Number 3, critically, your replication study makes a contribution. So, for example, I talked about a constructive replication, which is when you use different kinds of measures. So if you're using, let's say, I gave the example of a market-based measure versus an accounting-based measure. You have a theory, a hypothesis for why the results should be the same or different. So you're learning something about the phenomenon through the use of different measures. It's not a hit job. You're changing the design features, so you make a contribution to theory, you understand the why better. Or if you add a moderator, which would be a cultural difference. It's not that, oh yeah, in China it's different from the US. No, I need to know why. Because that's when you make the contribution. So the third point is that the replication has to make a contribution to our theory, to our knowledge. And number 4, this was alluded to, a single paper is never the final arbiter of knowledge. So in some of the, I'm not familiar with all the papers that Per mentioned, but at least in one of them, it's a series of replications. So within the same paper, you don't just do one replication, you do multiple. So I'm thinking about the secret sauce for publishing a replication. Pick a good precedent study. This is not it. Number 2, not a right or wrong. 3, the replication makes a contribution to theory. And 4, it's a series of replications. I would argue and bet that most of the papers you mentioned fit those criteria. And you can tell me where I'm right or wrong.
I was planning to move forward, but there are a couple of questions. So let's go with the question.
Yeah, just a question or a point, and that is, I'm a little disturbed to listen because we've tried many times to publish replications, and maybe we'd be accused of being on one end or the other. But fundamentally, in the open science model, we keep testing research until we identify that it works. Per's point that he wouldn't trust a medical decision based on the kind of research we do is a very valid one. And the reason why you wouldn't want to have an operation based on the kind of research we do is because when we publish our work, we don't make the data available like they do in the open science, like they do in some economics or psychology journals, so that other people can make sure that you didn't make a human error. Maybe you just made a human error, it wasn't intentional, but we should know. So rather than bury it and say, well, you know what, that was 10 years ago, who cares? Someone makes a human error, as we all do. Maybe we ought to know that, because if I want to have that operation, I want to be sure that the research is actually really valid, and I'm going to want to be sure that that data is accurately analyzed, and that there have been subsequent research demonstrating the same thing. We have to stop lying to ourselves. We are pretending, we lie to ourselves. We pretend when we publish a paper that it's scientifically accurate. We don't need to go back and check it again because it's been validated by 3 reviewers and an editor. and we pretend as though we can keep going forward and say, well, the methods change and the data changes. Well, the reality is we're using methods now that nobody can really understand because the complexity of them requires computer algorithms that we can't even look at on a regular mathematical spreadsheet. We're assuming that everything works, and yeah, sure, 10 years from now we'll probably find out it didn't, but at least let's make the data available. And I think every journal has an obligation to have at least one space where they publish a replication in good honor, in good honesty, good integrity, and it doesn't matter whether the replication supports or contradicts the work. It will advance our science, and maybe when we have 10 or 20 replications that show us that actually what someone demonstrated works, then maybe Parrott would have more confidence in saying, I might look at this work and go under the knife with the data that we have.
Thank you. I'll let Connie start that.
All right, this is great to hear the enthusiasm. So I wanted to address your point about compelling people to disclose their data, because we had a long discussion about this at SMJ. And now, I'm not sure how similar entrepreneurship is, but at least in the field of strategic management, people go to a lot of trouble to collect data that is really unique, right? This is not like just, some data set that everybody uses, right? Well, if you think about the incentive effects of compelling people to release their data immediately when they've probably collected that data with the eye that we could do several studies out of this, you will no longer have all these cool, unique data. So then we thought, well, maybe we could, say you have 3 or 4 years to do this, and then you have to release your data. And then we thought, we don't want to be policemen, right? And so what we tried to do is encourage people. So what I like, I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer to this, but there's a trade-off depending on the kind of research.
Are you familiar with the phrase, the research practice gap? Anyone? What do you mean when we say that? What do we mean by that? Anyone?
The research is saying something, and the reality is very different. There's a second part of it, which is that, whatever is researched is written in its own cryptic, narrow form, is not translatable quickly to actions that can be taken in the field.
Very good. Essentially, the research practice gap means that the research that we're creating is not being used by practitioners, okay? How are we doing at home?
0.
How are we using our own theories, our own research to manage our shop, okay? We know, based on one of my research domains is performance management. We know that the individual performance, the level of performance, depends on mainly 2 things: knowledge, skills, abilities, and motivation. For any domain. So to be a good performer, you need to know your job, and you need to want to do your job well. Instead of performance, let's talk about research performance. You need to do your job well, you need to be trained very well, and we're talking about advanced methods, theoretical knowledge of the field, so you need to know how to be a very good researcher. Number 2, you need to want to do really good research, not just get published in the A journals. The first part has to do with training and knowledge. Second part has to do with the motivational systems that are now putting an incredible amount of pressure on faculty to publish in A journals, a smaller and smaller list by all means necessary. So, you get what you pay for. You're not paying for credible research, you're not paying for impactful research, you're paying for A publications. Therefore, you get A publications. I'm not saying that these are non-credible, but we need to think about using our own research to manage our own industry. We know that editors now are dealing with thousands of submissions. I just went to the Journal of Management meeting. They received 1,300 submissions as of today. We're in August. They're going to hit 2,000 by the end of the year. What do? We'll just add more AEs. We know organizational design. We know job design. We don't change those. We just add more AEs. So now you get 24 AEs, and just crossing your fingers that you'll get lucky with the AE assignment, because that's one of 24 journals, essentially. So we need to think about how can we use our own research to change the way we do things. So when I served as president of the academic management just a couple of years ago, we started to do what we call mini experiments. Because when things are going well, the book Good to Great, you don't want to change things. So we need to start to think, okay, what if a journal implements replications for a couple of years? Will the impact factor go down? I don't know, but if we manage the risk, right? But let's get some data and do a little mini experiment. What if, oh no, we received 2,000 submissions. Do you know how many Nature gets? Do you know how many Science gets? Does anybody know? Raise your hand. 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. Oh no, we are in a very difficult and unique position. No, we are not. So we need to rethink and use our own knowledge. Well, we teach our MBAs, by the way, on designing jobs, on managing teams, on designing organizations, and on rewarding people. If we use the knowledge we give to our MBAs, I think we'll be a lot better off.
In the interest of time, I'll move to Peter. Peter, you had a question?
Yeah, I want to riff a little bit on Connie's and Herman's last responses. If we generalize the discussion slightly to make it about research integrity more generally, so replication is part of that, but also data transparency, you're asking people to share data and code, pre-registration to cut back on p-hacking and so forth. I'd like to get the panel's thoughts, and Connie, you already addressed this a little bit, on how these principles apply to other types of papers. So that would include papers with proprietary data, papers with data that's confidential, like all these papers with the Nordic country registry data, and what about qualitative empirical studies? We see a lot more qualitative studies in the entrepreneurship field, and I don't think you can replicate a Kathy Eisenhart paper. Does that mean, so my question is, what standards of transparency and replicability do we apply to those kinds of papers, or do we not apply it at all? And if so, are we implicitly or even explicitly discouraging researchers from engaging in the kinds of activities that don't meet these new transparency standards?
Thank you, Peter, for including qualitative research in your question, because that was my second question. I'm hearing from some doc students, junior researchers, that it seems higher expectations are being placed on quantitative researchers, while the expectations with replication are not the same for qualitative research.
I think part of the issue there is that there is a clash with another growing concern, that is research ethics and integrity and all that, and protecting those who give the data, and that of course is even worse with qualitative research, right? So those demands that seem so easy, sort of pre-registration and then data sharing, that logic fits so limited experimental studies. So you have all your hypotheses, you collect data for that specific purpose, then you're done, you can share your data. If you collect a huge data set that can be explored in millions of ways, like we did with the PhD studies and the Australian COSE studies, well, eventually we put these in the public domain, right? But of course there is a concern that those that put in all the work then publish one study and then share it, and it's free for everyone to do whatever they like. We can't have that, right? And we can't have demands that qualitative researchers should share all the raw data, because there will be so much in it that makes it identifiable, right? If you combine all the, so it's tricky. In relation to what the broader integrity issue and the impossibility of reviewers and editors being able to catch everything, the ultimate policing is our internalized values, that I don't engage in dodgy behavior to further my career. We must feel that very strongly internally, and we must induce that in future generations, because there is to solve it with policing is never going to work. 99% of the policing must be our internal sense of integrity and or professionalism.
Did any of the panelists have any comments?
I just want something really. I understand Herman's point, and I think it's a great point about do we change the structure. Ironically, the one reason I doubled the number of AEs when I took over JBV was for this very reason, though. Because what is the best way to capture this? It's attention. So if an editor has so many manuscripts on their desk that they can only be in process mode, then that means they are not engaging with the paper in a way that that a human being needs to make judgment calls on is this good work or not. That includes policing the reviewers. If you have time to read the reviews, not just vote count, you're reading the paper, you're reading the reviews, you're deeply getting into the paper, and that requires more time, right? This is a voluntary workforce. Too often somebody signs up, even at the academy, you know, it's a great honor to be an editor for 3 years, but it is such a heavy load that they just don't have the attention span to be able to engage with each paper the way that they need to in order to really deeply connect and feel out are these reviews sincerely crafted? Are they not crafted by AI? We haven't even talked about that. We haven't even gone there. Believe me, if there's something to drive me out of being an editor in the not too distant future, that's it right there, because that's a whole new level. AI generated reviews. Soon there'll be papers generated by AI, the reviews generated by AI. I'm looking how I can turn my position into AI. That'd be very convenient. But there is a real risk and a fear of that. So these are just some things that, one final thing, administrative structure, again, I know he talks about this, Elsevier will probably hate me for this. I mean, we are owned by Elsevier. We are not an academy journal, JBB. There is not an association in entrepreneurship like there is with SMS or other areas of PSYOP, you know. I mean, why is that an issue? Because there's not really a governing body to really help with that. And private companies have different interests, clearly, than associations have. And so you run into some issues here. How do I build that administrative structure? I've done it constantly on my own, with volunteer labor, with our editors, with the volunteer force. JBV.org, that was created just by us, with no budget, by the way. That was on our own. This is how we've done it over and over. It's been volunteer labor. It's been you reaching out, contributing, because you care about the field. But when we talk about administrative structure, I've got to figure out how to do that on the top of everything we're doing. We had 1,000 manuscripts ourselves last year. I looked at each and every one of those coming through. And I'm open. When we get voluntary labor, it's awesome. But that's what it takes to change an administrative structure, and that's a real challenge for us. That's just a fact. We don't. It's not a pay model.
I just wanted to say something real quick about the qualitative issue. Very important topic. In 2019, one of my former doctoral students and I, Angelo Solarino, wrote a paper in SMJ 2019 on transparency and replicability in qualitative research. That has been received by, I would say, a very robust response by a number of qualitative colleagues, esteemed friends, and an editorial in ASQ by Mike Pratt et al. And Sarah Kaplan and others. So this is an ongoing conversation. Replicability is contentious. Some people in the qualitative sphere say that this is not a goal of qualitative research, but our point was it has to be transparent, because one of the key tenets of qualitative research is thick description. That is a pillar of qualitative research. And if you read the paper and you don't know exactly what the authors did, the theoretical conclusions might be challenged. So I think it's in the interest of qualitative researchers to be as transparent as possible. Replicability, that we can grab a drink, and if there's any left in that scotch, we can go over that in the evening. But transparency is really a principle that applies across the board.
That's add one thing, because I know we have a question, but to Peter's question, I know Peter is a co-editor of SEJ, so gotta give him a plug for that from S Journal there. You know, in my research, I tend to use a lot of proprietary data, company data or proprietary data sets. It's just because of the kind of research I do. I always try and make the description of my data, of my variable construction, I disclose all of the versions of what program I use, what Python code I use, where you can find it, so that even though I can't disclose my data, if you wanted to try and get close to this, you could know what I did, right? And I don't know if I succeed in doing this, but I think that that is at least a middle ground for data where you can't fully disclose, to really try and show as carefully as possible what you did.
Wonderful. I think we have another question from the audience.
Yeah, I was going to actually reply to what Jeff was talking about, because I received a survey from Elsevier in February, and it was two parts. I think this was done pretty sneakily, because it was, how did I feel the review process of an Elsevier journal, because I had just recently published there, and they wanted to know how that was. That was 25% of the survey. Then came part two, and part two was about how do I consider AI in reviews. I went through the roof. I mean, I was very upset, because we're talking about peer review, and I go, that's not peer review anymore. So we have actually, this all, because if the publisher is already asking these questions, it means to me that they are way ahead. They're gonna launch something pretty soon. So
to be clear, right now, it's illegal.
Yeah.
If you upload somebody's paper, you're breaking the law.
Yeah.
So I just want to be clear on that. By the way, that's not Elsevier.
No, but
if you're doing this, you're breaking the law. You're beyond ethics.
Yes,
I mean,
and you have all
do not do it.
idealized.
If you're thinking about doing it, don't do it.
Exactly. No, but this, I mean, it's not just this. When we're talking about data here, I think we have to be increasingly concerned, because some of this data that can appear in some submissions, not necessarily collected out there by surveys or anything else. I'm very reluctant at this point, because I know that you can generate data via AI. So for instance, if you have missing answers, missing replies, as we have been trained, that goes out. No, you can use AI and ask the system to say what's the probability that the response should be. So AI then becomes a method, actually. There's a ton of things here. I mean, this is getting into be a landmine, and I think it's very important that we actually talk about this, because I'm out the door. I will retire if we stop with peer review. I mean, because peer review is so important.
And Christina, are you listening? That gives you probably a topic for next year's plenary on AI in research reviews, and good topic for Copenhagen. But
Can do we have time for a positive example?
Yeah, please.
That also addresses the research practice gap. So practitioners don't often act on our findings, right? Actually, they shouldn't, because the results of single studies aren't strong enough evidence base for that. But I've had the privilege of having some of my research, and you can get the impression from the replication crisis that almost nothing ever replicates. I mean, I think that's exaggerated. Imagine if the first study gets the results exactly right, and they are exactly at p.05. Then you should expect half of it not to replicate, right? So, for random reasons. So, to ask that you get the same effect with significance is a harsh criteria. And we don't know if it was the first or the second study that was wrong. Anyway, the positive example. So in 2009, I published a paper which was on growth and profitability, and the simple question was sort of, how do you end up in the enviable position of having above average growth and above average profitability? Do you start with fixing the profitability, then you grow on that basis, or do you become profitable as a result of your growth? And we found quite clearly, Australian data and Swedish data, that you're much more likely if you start with fixing the profitability and then you have a sound growth based on that. If you grow on a weak profitability basis, you're instead much more likely to end up in the poor corner, underperforming on both dimensions. This was seen as a bit controversial. It was replicated in Finland successfully in biotech by God. Malin Brembach, yes. I have a daughter, Malin, I forget her name. That's the advanced stage of the panel. There's been another replication in Finland this year, but above all, there was a massive replication of this in 2022, published in ETP. They redid what we did, separated in 28 countries. Everyone supported the results, about the same magnitude, so that 2 to 2.5 times more likely to move that direction and also the other direction. Across different industry sectors and firm and age classes. Using time lags from 1 to 7 years. We only had 2 to 3 years. That was one of the weaknesses of the study. And using several different analysis approaches, not extremely consistent results. They all have 29 sites so far, but I posted this on LinkedIn and we had 35,000 views, 80 comments, 40 reshares, lots of practitioners involved in that, lots of practitioners who felt relieved that we had some evidence against the insanity of growth at all costs. When we have that kind of evidence, we have something to take to practice, and most of the time we don't have so strong evidence.
Wonderful. We'll move to the next question that I have, and then we'll move to the audience question. In 2005, the Stanford epidemiologist John Ioannidis suggested that most published findings are false. Some researchers in our field have taken it to mean that most management and entrepreneurship research is false and cannot be replicated. Do you agree with this observation? If true, is this a cause for concern for our field?
No, I don't agree.
Mike.
Yeah,
Nobody agrees.
I don't agree.
Is that the Ioannidis at all? Well, first of all, we need to remember what that paper was about. The paper looked at p-values. Didn't look at effect sizes. So the p-value is a horrible way to do science. Because we so much want to learn whether there's an effect, that we look at something to see if that's true, but we're looking at the wrong thing. The p-value is a probability that the effect does not exist in the population. So if the probability is very small, we say, okay, it does exist. Wait. We're not saying the effect exists. We're saying it is highly unlikely that it does not exist. 2 steps removed. So many years ago, in the year 2010, we published a paper in Organizational Research Methods titled Customer-Centric Science, in which we say, to truly understand if there's something happening, which is a contribution to theory, you first want to look at the p-value, okay? Because if there's nothing there, you don't move on to the next step. So is it likely that it's 0? If it's not likely that it's 0, okay, I'm happy, but I move forward. The next step is, how large is the effect? And that's correlation coefficients, eta squared, r squared, omega squared, d values, depending on the type of design. Different, you can have a log ratio. It depends on the study, how big is that relationship or effect. But we don't stop there. The third step in the customer-centric science approach is to understand the importance of that effects for both theory and practice. For theory, we can do that because we can understand if we found something that we didn't know, or if what we found is a lot larger than what we knew. But the impact on practice part, we're not really good at that. We're not equipped. So it takes a little extra work to share the result and maybe do a mini qualitative study or focus group or something like that to try to understand and talk to the customer of our research to see if this matters to them. Is this thing that I studied and for which we found this size of effect, does it matter to you as a practitioner, as a manager, as a policymaker? So the p-value is so far from all these steps to eventually get to the end result, which is we want our research to be useful, to change the world, to improve societies, to improve the lives of people in organizations. The p-value is like 5 or 6 steps removed from that. So Aguinis et al., I don't know if I pronounced it right, that all they did is a p-value. So yeah, I mean, they found that of course p-values don't replicate because, like Per said, there's sampling error. And let me tell you a quick story when I was in graduate school. My PhD is in industrial psychology. So there was a lab of social psychologists. And of course we know that if you look at the world, any kind of relationship, even the relationship between the weight of the microphone and how much water I have here, if I go to the 1 billionth decimal point, it will not be 0. At some point along the line, like really far out there, this is not exactly 0, okay? There's gravity affecting both, pressure affecting both, so there's some relationship. So all you need to do is get a very, very large effect size until you will find that p-value not be 0. Huh?
Very large sample.
That's right, very large. Very large sample, sorry, very large sample. An advanced moment. Very large sample. So I'm talking to the social psychology PhD student, and I see the student going back to the lab every day. It's like, what's going on? It's like, oh, I'm getting close to the p-value of 0.05. I collect 10 more data from 10 more people every day until I get to below 0.05. That's where I stop. That's how bad the p-values are. So the study based on just p-values, they're not really truly informative. Okay?
All right, so this is great, thank you. That's fabulous. So I don't know, I'm just going to make a pitch. SMJ, we said no asterisks, period. We do not want cutoffs and threshold values, and we've been having a heck of a time getting other journals to sign on, you know. But, and also what we said is we want you to look at the magnitude of the effects. So you can report your exact p-value, so we have some sense of what this is, but tell us about the magnitude of the effect. This depends on the sample size, the power of the study, which is related, things like that. So, a pitch.
Okay. I think there's a question from the audience.
Okay, sorry. It's a brief comment because my name is Czesław Mieszcza from Krakow, and I'm research on complex systems. And I do interdisciplinary research. I'd like to be as brief as possible because I came across very many problems which are under the topic of this discussion. What are the problems? I just enumerate them. First of all, we deal with social constructs. No matter whether we like it or not. So what we then say about measurement and so on. Secondly, then comes the question, does it mean scientific in positivist sense or in constructivist sense? So then we have, that's another provocative question. What is another problem? Operationalization and measurement. So what more? There is a very old problem of idiographic and nomothetic sciences. And my general comment or my general remark is, after my very fierce discussion with my colleagues physicists, I'm by background also physicist and do research, they say it's not science. This is not science, this, that, and so, because of social concepts. I fiercely respond to them that they are not, that it's not true. And summing it up, the problems of replication in management are much more complex. We have to consider this what is underneath. And then we can say, let me just finish with some brief examples, just the name. I've patented some of the names of the ideas. Let's say risk society. There was no definition of risk in the first book about the risk society, you know. Then no definition of paradigm in the first book by Thomas Kuhn. Then a PhD student from Austria may they recommend, Professor, where's the definition of this? Summing it up. So it's a very, very interesting, very inspiring discussion for me. But nonetheless, we have to consider this level, which is underneath of this. Thank you very much.
Any comments from the panel on that?
I think I addressed some of those things in my opening statement.
Okay, wonderful.
There's a range of things we need. And of course, social science is much more difficult than physics in some regard. We have a much more messy reality to try to understand.
Some of you referred, some of the panelists referred to the replication study by Chris Crawford and co-authors published in Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice. 19 seminal entrepreneurship studies employing PSCD data found that less than a third replicated. More generally, the number of studies that are failing to replicate in management and entrepreneurship research are accumulating. A famous study, replication in entrepreneurship, was attempted on business planning and performance, which we have one of the co-authors here. I think this has prompted calls for greater emphasis on replication in entrepreneurship research and doctoral education. What do you think about emphasizing replication in our research and doctoral training?
It needs to be emphasized, and with arguments like, or in comparison with medicine, for example, right? Along the lines of what Herman said, those only a third replicated. What does that mean? I mean, if a study has a positive effect, just like the first one, it is not significant, but its magnitude is practically or theoretically meaningful. I don't see that as a failed replication, right? So we need to focus on effect size first.
Yeah, I mean, actually, someone who published in the SMJ special issue, Lori Rosenkopf, very nice replication paper. It's staged, it's a quasi-replication. She said right away, we should have a lot of doctoral students have to do second-year paper. Why not have them do replication? So, I mean, it's a great way to learn, right? You know, just how do you construct variable? What, what makes for a good study? So I'm all for this. I'm not all for the, finding fault kind of studies, right? I would prefer where they have to collect, their own data that, or expand something so they can learn how do you build on research. So that's what I would
Wouldn't that
encourage.
be a wonderful idea? They all have one replication paper in the training.
Yeah, and guess how much we'd learn?
So precisely this idea is described with evidence that and how instructors can implement replications in doctoral education. Again, this is Schwab et al., February 2023, Journal of Management Scientific Reports. The title is How Replication Studies Can Improve Doctoral Student Education. The first part of the paper describes how many replications have been published in which journals, how to do it right, and examples of how to do it. Great and benefits such as learning, training. So I think there's a great opportunity to also, going back to Per's point about the values. And I put that, remember I said that performance is based on KSAs and motivation. You need to know how to do the job and want to do the job. So the first part includes values. You need to know what you're trying to do. You need to know not just your methods, but you want to have published paper that is impactful, papers that will make a difference, papers that are credible, papers that are theoretically interesting and well executed. And then you want to do it. But even if we do the best training and teach our students the best values, if we continue with this madness of publish 4 A's or bust for tenure, the people are not going to use the values, the knowledge, because the pressure is too much. It's too much. We will continue to see some of these problems and questionable research practices. And it's even worse from people who know how to do it, because those who know how to do it can actually, I have asked ChatGPT to create a very complex data set with a 3-level structure with random error. And if somebody asks to see a data set like that, it looks perfectly imperfect. It's absolutely perfectly imperfect. it has the amount of random error that I introduce in the data set. The only way you can see if I cheated is if you ask for the receipts of the people who participated in the study, or I tell you which database. So asking for someone to share the data is no longer a way to know whether the data are fake or not, because ChatGPT can now, version 4.0, create it, but you need to know how to create it. But if you know how to do it so well, you might as well do your own research. You don't need to do it. Only if the motivation is there. So we really need to work on the motivational systems. Many of us full professors, deans, associate deans, need to understand that we get what we pay for. If we ask for hits, that's what we get. Papers with 20 authors, no consistent stream of research. I put you in my paper, you put me in mine. Publish in a journal by all means necessary. It doesn't matter if you really know how to do it. If you don't get tenure, have to move your family to another state and go to the DMV and get a new driver's license. Versus, you know what, hypothesis 3 didn't work out, I'm just gonna get it out of the paper. Who uses our research anyway? It's like white collar crime. So we really need to think about the KSAs, but the motivation, very, very critical.
I think there's one other piece, I agree 100%. I think there's one other piece too, and that's that this is not a novel discussion, it's been out there, but our obsession with novelty. And it's often thrown out as a negative, but I actually think sometimes it's positive as well. And what I mean by that is novelty is usually people are studying something because it's intrinsically motivating, it's interesting inherently to them, it's relevant out there. They've looked around the world and this is what's happening right now. We don't have a lot of research. So, I mean, that makes one reason why it's difficult for accumulation of knowledge in entrepreneurship, because ideally, our scholars have their eyes up and they're looking at something out in the world, because science inherently is always looking backward. It's a very difficult thing to fight as an editor, as a reviewer, especially in the action or the associate editor role, because basically you're always asking for a theoretical contribution. You're always looking backwards to do that, and it's almost always you're wanting to encourage people to look out for that new phenomena and study those new topics. And so in entrepreneurship, we have so many entrepreneurial people, like their nature is very entrepreneurial, that they don't want to do research that looks just like the research that's come before. And we've run into that many times as well, that it's hard. You'll see students or colleagues just get tired of entrepreneurial orientation. Take that for an example, a case in point that's been around for a long time, to the point that we could have meta-analysis for that. But many students just don't want to study that topic. They're like, it's been there, it's done, it's played out. And you run into this, right? After 10 years, it's like we have to reboot Spider-Man every 10 years, right? It's the same thing with our research. And you feel like, okay, I keep waiting for the original topics in entrepreneurship. When will they recycle around? Maybe in a new manifestation, but we don't want necessarily to limit and say you can only do the stuff that will build this accumulation. I desperately want to keep my journal from becoming stale by making sure that that new ideas have a voice, that new methods have a voice. And doing that is very difficult to see the kind of accumulation of knowledge that I think you see. It almost feels like this replication crisis sometimes is about that. You know, where's the accumulation coming from? And it's a desire for that accumulation so that we can go sell it to consultants or point to the robustness of our research. I think that happens naturally over time, but our field is only JBV is 40 years old next year, so that's it. That's the accumulation of that is just not that much time, not that much research. So it takes time to build those kinds of robust findings that we know hold up over time, different settings. I think we're getting there, but it's not going to happen immediately or overnight.
I'm glad Jeff mentioned this, because one of my questions that I did not get to ask was about prioritizing novelty over replication in our field, and if that is a cause for concern. We are about 5 minutes away from our time, so before I continue with questions, any questions from the audience?
Hi, also coming from a qualitative background, transferability is one of the terms that has been used as a option in exchange for replicability. What do you think of that? Does it make qualitative research less reliable, or is something that potentially quantitative research could consider as well? replicating, but in other contexts. So contextualization and transferability.
I think that's what I meant by quasi-replication, right? So certainly for quantitative studies, I'm not a qualitative researcher, so I'll let other people answer.
Well, you've written about qualitative research and replication, the need for replication, qualitative research, I think. No. Herman, was it you? Yeah. Herman.
Much like any other type of research, I said there were 3 types of replication studies. Remember, the first one is reproducibility, the second is literal or constructive replication, and the third one is generalizability, which is, I think, transferability. To what extent? So the question is not just the answer yes or no. Does it transfer, yes or no? Because that doesn't make a sufficient contribution. The question is why. So can we explain, understand, and predict why something can be transferred or not, and do we know why this relationship exists in some contexts but not in others? I think that applies to all kinds of research, because at the end of the day, we're trying to understand the world better. And I also understand constructivism versus positivism, and those labels get thrown around. I've been accused of being a neo-positivist many times. So when somebody doesn't like this, you're a neo-positivist. I think there's a world out there, and of course you can have your perceptions and your own beliefs about what the world looks like, but if you have the wrong beliefs, the world will punish you. If you try to stop the train with your bare hands, the world will punish you. There is a reality out there. Now, the way you study it, the way you model it, there could be different ways, but there is a world out there, and if neo-positivist means that that's true, then I'll take it. Better than other things I've been called.
I mean, it's important to remember that qualitative research in general typically is used to build theory. So we're really not, I mean, the theory that can then be tested for how relevant it is in other contexts. So I think we need to be careful not to impose quantitative standards and positivist positions onto qualitative work, and I think that we've gone there a little bit today, and we need to be careful about that, because it is a different paradigm, and it does apply, it does have different rules. The theory that comes out of it can arguably be tested the way that we're talking about it, but when I build a theory around a particular specific context, that doesn't mean I necessarily say that it's going to apply to other contexts. The model that comes out of that applies to that context, and then deductive research is going to have to test whether it applies to other contexts. So that's important to remember in this space, and that's why qualitative is not going to operate according to these same rules that we're talking about with replication. It's not just that I agree with to the degree we have transparency, that is an ideal yes in both cases, but the reasons why we do the research are completely different, and that's important to remember.
I know many participants in the room had questions, but we are running out of time. So at this stage, I'll call my co-organizer, Christina, to deliver some closing remarks. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you very much, Vishal. I'm Christina Todoraki. I'm the PDW chair and dedicated assistant of our program chair, Vishal. Entrepreneurship in our division has a very important role for these plenary sessions. And actually our goal was to represent a topic that is the right moment to call to our entrepreneurship community. And the goal of these topics is to, at the same time, take risks. Entrepreneurship is about taking risks, but also tackling the difficult questions. And I think replicability and a replication study was a very difficult and misunderstood topic. So research is all about opening, advancing, and closing research discussions. But entrepreneurship research is also about taking risk and unraveling entrepreneurship phenomenon. We can agree today that we opened the Pandora's box about replication studies, and with our goal to maintain as researchers, our goals and objective in publishing research. We need to be transparent, rigorous, and impactful. So this plenary has fully responded to this goal. I really enjoyed our excellent and tremendous, inspiring guest speakers today, but also our audience with our engaging questions. So we had a lot of thoughts about the theory, the method, the misunderstanding of these replication studies. So it was also a better understanding what are supposed to do. And as a qualitative scholar, you know, I have been been telling all of my career all of these misunderstanding topics. I was a qualitative, they were saying, no, you had this problem to presenting yourself. You know, I'm only a qualitative researcher. And now we have, it's just a replication study, cannot get published. I think we can agree today it's very easy, and some of our scholars in entrepreneurship have been very quickly take some shortcuts. It's not a yes or no, or right or wrong or question. Very quickly said, no, you cannot publish with qualitative studies. So, what are doing qualitative scholars? Or we cannot publish with the replication study, opening very challenging questions about what is next. Today, I think it's not about qualitative or application study, but it's how you do it, how you engage and provide your research gap, how you identify. It doesn't mean, oh, it's not done again, or I put this theory to another context, it is done. It's to show us what we find and how you continue to advance, you open, you advance, or you close research discussion. So I think today we have an in-depth understanding about what should be replication studies. And entrepreneurship is about value creation and doing experiments, observe, and adjust. These come from us, entrepreneurship scholars. And I think this is the way of what entrepreneurship scholars say about improvement. And a lot of these today's participants share the concerns about the evolution we face about research, how we replicate rigorously our study, what if our studies are meaningful, and also how we can maintain integrity with technology progress and artificial intelligence. So my message, we opened today's discussion, we have successfully advanced and filled the scope. Thank you very much, Vishal, Gupta, for putting the level that high for us for the next year in Copenhagen. So it's an open call for Copenhagen's meeting. I would like to congratulate the spectacular panel, Jeff McMullen, Herman Aguinis, Connie, and Davidsson for their tremendous interdisciplinary insights, and also for all of you. So I think today we can say, you're starting the session, say we can together do a nice output, or can go all together and have a bad outcome. I think we made it, all of us, audience and panelists, an impressive 1.5-hour session that represents the entrepreneurship division spirit. Thank you all, you can congratulate. I see some of you, no, you cannot leave now. So the last call, okay, it's for a photo to show the entrepreneurship spirit. So before you're leaving, I will definitely like if we can here have the entrepreneurship division to take a collective photo. If you don't mind, if we can come all of us before leaving to take a very